So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to the penultimate event of the Centre for Policy Studies and CapEx's program. We are saving the best for last with first Lord Frost and then Jacob Rees-Mogg. We are injecting a dose of pure conservatism into the veins of the audience. I don't think David Ross needs any introduction. He is the architect in many ways of our Brexit policy. He negotiated the deal which took us out of Europe, and he is now in charge of implementing it. He is also one of the sort of brains trust behind the new vision of global Britain, and on top of all of that is in charge of seizing the opportunities of Brexit in terms of changing how we regulate our country. Lord Frost, thank you very much for coming. It's an honour to have you here.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you very much. Good to be here.
And we'll continue in that hard-hitting vein of Jonathan. So I know you've been asked this question an awful lot, and no doubt will when the questions come, but we'll get it out of the way first. When are we declaring Article 16?
When we need to, I think, is the answer. We're at a crunch point in the next month or so. We have not yet had a proper answer from the EU to the proposals we've put down on Northern Ireland. Hopefully that will come soon. We then need some proper talks with them, some proper intensive talks to see if we can bridge the gap, which I've no doubt will be quite a big gap at first. I will try my best to get an agreement that meets what we need in those few weeks, but if we can't, then we will be in Article 16 territory. I would guess, crunch point comes at some point next month. This is something that can't wait very long. We need to bring stability to Northern Ireland. We need to find solutions that are going to last. We did our best in 2019, but clearly it didn't quite work, and now we've got to do the job again and bring stability in a way that lasts.
So the critical question here would be, you knew what the deal was, you negotiated it and you signed it, and now you're saying actually it didn't work. Was it a case that you knew it was imperfect when it was implemented, or is it how the European Union has approached the implementation process that's made it problematic?
So I think it's a bit of both. Obviously, we were in an extremely difficult situation, as I said in my main speech in autumn 2019. We've been handed a terrible inheritance in terms of the backstop and a lot of points that have been conceded over the years in negotiations, and we had to prioritise where we put our effort, and we absolutely wanted to get out of the backstop. If we'd not done so, we'd now be negotiating our exit from the customs union, possibly, with the EU having a veto on that, if we'd managed to leave it all. And, we had to prioritise. We came to what we thought was a reasonable balance of interests for Northern Ireland. Obviously, we'd had our negotiating hands sort of cut away in Parliament. So we did our best. We thought it was a reasonable balance. We thought it would last. It hasn't lasted. And I think the EU's heavy-handed behaviour, their attempt to put a sort of hard border at the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland for vaccines purposes sort of destroyed the moral integrity, I think, of the protocol at that point. And thereafter, we've been in a different world. And that's a pity, but that's where it is, and we now got to do the job.
And I mean, is the current arrangement, is it a problem for Westminster? Is it a problem for Northern Ireland, or is it a problem for Britain as a whole?
So I think it's all three, I would say. I think it is hard for us to sustain for long an arrangement where it's not easy for companies in GB to trade into Northern Ireland. I mean, that is very unusual. You have to go back to sort of 17th century France and Colbert to find occasions where there are trade barriers within a country. So this is a pretty unusual set of arrangements. We have to find a way to deal with that, and we focus very much on the problem of checks going into Northern Ireland, and that is a problem, undoubtedly. But in some ways, the even bigger problem is the process. that if you're a company in Great Britain, you look at this, you're thinking of exporting to Northern Ireland, you look at the process and you say, can't be bothered with that. And that is more problematic in some ways than the actual checks process and more corrosive.
So your former negotiating partner, Michel Barnier, has written a book. Have you read it yet?
I've sort of skim-read the French version. I haven't seen the English version yet, I'm afraid.
And are you surprised by anything in it? And B, are you surprised by Michel's reinvention as a firebrand Eurosceptic in the French domestic politics?
I think I am a bit surprised by his sort of cherry picking from the integrity of the EU legal order, which is obviously a bit unusual where he started. I mean, it's quite a good read, actually, and negotiations are quite dull for those who are not actually involved in them, and I think it's quite hard to make an interesting book about them, and I think he has actually conveyed some of the mood from the bits that I was involved in and the bits I saw at one remove. I think there are bits left out, and the bits I was involved in, well, recollections may vary.
You can take the man out of the Foreign Office, but you have to. I think we will inevitably come back to these topics. But one of the things I wanted to do with this hour that we've got is that you have an extremely prominent job and you've become extremely prominent, but not a lot of people know who you are. You've been a special advisor, you've been a backroom guy, you've been a diplomat. So I wanted to give a taste of So first of all, you were in the Foreign Office. You were a Foreign Office staffer. You rose to become ambassador to Denmark. You were one of our chief trade guys. Not a lot of people then make the leap from that to sort of partisan side of things. I mean, what was the motivation there?
So it goes a long way back, if I'm honest, and for me, actually, the kind of important moment in my life in this context was going to Brussels in the early 90s. And I was posted to our representation, as it then was, there. And at that point, I had, I think, quite sort of standard Foreign Office views about Europe, and I'd not really thought very deeply about it at that point. And it rubbed off very quickly when I was actually in Brussels and I saw the way the institutions work. This was just after the Maastricht process, obviously. And I just saw us sort of getting rolled over. I saw a sense of belief in the European project that I didn't share, and I didn't see why we had to sort of go along with this. And it just kind of corroded my kind of belief in the, in what we were doing there. And, I guess at that point, actually leaving the EU was a long way out of political reality, but I came a bit of a sort of internal critic and Eurosceptic. I did a fair bit of European work and a fair bit of other work. But, I finally left the civil service 10 years ago because I think I couldn't live the contradictions. I didn't really believe what we were doing. I didn't, it was becoming internally corrosive, and I felt I had to move on. And then it was just luck. I think, being in the right place at the right time and making the connections, and here I am. I don't claim any sort of particular sort of brilliance for it. I was just the right person at the right time.
And obviously the right person at the right time was sort of bumping into Boris Johnson, as it were. I mean, and you became one of his advisors. I mean, how did that relationship come about, and what's it been like working with Boris? I should say your colleague Liz Truss was on this stage yesterday, and there was a brilliant. Someone asked her who the best foreign secretary is of all the foreign secretaries, and without a second's hesitation, she replied, Boris Johnson. Would you share that judgment?
So I actually first got to know. My paths crossed with Boris very briefly in Brussels in the early 90s when he was Telegraph correspondent there, and I was in the mission. We barely knew each other. In fact, I would say we didn't. We sort of knew who each other were, but no more than that. And that is the only connection I had till during and after the referendum campaign. Sort of intermediaries put us in touch, and when he got the job of Foreign Secretary, those intermediaries suggested I might become a special advisor, and that's how it happened. And I think the PM and I, we have found that on these sort of questions, on European foreign policy questions, we instinctively see eye to eye about things, and I think that's why, for me, the relationship has worked. I've been able to concentrate on delivery and getting things done, knowing that my back was covered, as it were, and we always, shared a view of where we were trying to get to, and I think it's worked very well. I would say Boris is I'm trying to give a sort of genuine answer here. I think Boris is an extremely underrated Foreign Secretary, and what I saw of him and what he put in place in the Foreign Office within an organisation that was sort of totally traumatised by the referendum result, a lot of that has paid off since and has put the organisation in a very different place. And some of the things we're doing now, the roots were, the sort of seeds were sown then. So that's my view.
I mean, a quick question. I mean, you mentioned the sort of Foreign Office mandarins and the mindset. I mean, is that something you chafed against? I mean, do you think that the Foreign Office has kind of? I mean, there's that classic line that the Foreign Office acts on behalf of other countries and represents other countries to the British government rather than representing the British government to other countries.
I think there's something in that. I think, inevitably, if you spend your time living abroad, and it's your job to understand other countries. That, it's not a trivial thing. You have to get under the skin, and you have to try and understand what makes them tick. But you've also got to stay in touch with your home country and understand what makes it tick. And I think too many people in the Foreign Office in the run-up to 2016 sort of lost that connection a bit. I don't think they were unusual in that. I think that's one of the reasons why the referendum result went as it did. But I think that I think there was an unthinking kind of worldview about things that people didn't challenge, they didn't think about. Not necessarily everybody shared, but it was part of the kind of culture, and you push back against it at your some sort of personal risk puts it too highly, but there's some problems.
But there was a reason you went into the private sector.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's part of the air of the establishment. It was up till 2016, and that is now changing. I do think your question about is the Foreign Office the Ministry for Foreigners? I think it sort of overstates it slightly. I think the problem for too many of our negotiators is they're sort of too nice. It's not that they're trying to do different things. I think too often we just want to be liked and we don't push points. And I think that's possibly it's a British kind of reflex a bit. Nobody's ever said that about me in this job, and I think we had to drill our negotiating team a lot in 2020 when everyone first got together, precisely so that people exhibited the right behaviours, people pushed back, people presented points hard. They didn't kind of immediately sort of respond to points others made and so on. And that was, we made a conscious effort to make this happen because it was a bit countercultural.
Going back to your relationship with the PM, one thing you two share is an interest. I hope is an interest in, because otherwise I've done my research very badly. Is an interest in history and a sense of kind of historical precedents and comparisons and where we are. Not a kind of like bring back the British Empire kind of thing, but just a knowledge of Britain's past and I mean, A, is that true, and B, what would you say the analogies are that sort of best reflect where we are now as a country and the opportunities and challenges ahead of us?
Yeah, I think we do, and I think it's good that we do. History is all we've got, after all. That is, nobody knows what's going to happen. The only guide we've got is what has happened, and so I think it's right that people should study history, which incidentally I think is history is a core of fact. I'm not one of these people who believes in sort of histories or perceptions or anything like that. History is about what happened, and historians' job is to uncover, facts without fear or favour, and that's not always obvious at the moment. I think the the lesson I draw from history, I mean, there's a lot we can learn from the history of Britain, but I think the main thing I learn is a broader lesson that it is very easy for apparently successful societies and countries to decline if they don't pay attention to what has made them successful. And, you know, the things that make the West successful, you know, constitution, sort of liberal constitutions, free economies, free expression, all those sort of things, you've got to pay attention to them. Countries that were superpowers in their day, like Spain in the 16th century, look at Argentina at the start of the 20th century. You know, these are countries that were at the cutting edge of history and declined. And I don't think we should be complacent in the West about this for us. We need to stay attached to our values, and that is what has made us successful.
So what are then the forces that, in your mind, are working to push us in that direction? I mean, there was a hint there about sort of identity politics, and you know, when you were talking about history as a set of facts versus a set of narratives that everyone can interpret according to their own lights.
I think it's just easy for successful societies to believe that, you know, success is a given. Success is always there because, you know, here we are, we're rich, successful, and it's kind of part of the way the world is. And that sort of success requires constant effort, constant renewal, constant sort of focus on what has made us successful and attempt to kind of replicate it and stick to it. So I think it's complacency, I think, is the risk for all apparently rich and powerful nations.
Well, and this brings us neatly to the Brexit opportunities unit, which, I mean, a justifiable criticism would be that it is now 5 years since the actual Brexit vote, and we are only now finally staffing up a Brexit opportunities unit. I was saying to you when we were backstage just now, you know, I was invited to my first seminar on the deregulatory opportunities of Brexit, I think about a week after the referendum vote. So, you know, what in your mind what are the opportunities now to reinvigorate, to do things differently, to push back against complacency?
Yeah, so we've got to be really serious about this, and I think, you know, the unit that works for me is only kind of one part of the total effort. It's an attempt to kind of find a focal point within government to drive things. It's got to be a whole government project if it's going to succeed. I think you know, we've got a mammoth job before us in looking at the law that's already on the statute book, and there are plenty of interest groups sort of vested in how things are done, and we have to push back against that. So, you know, some reviews have already begun. The Chancellor's review of financial services has begun. You know, we're well on the way to reforming procurement law, for example, where the savings are big. There are other things in train. We are going to do a review of all the EU law that we took onto our statute book in 2018. And looking particularly at the laws that came in sort of without much democratic scrutiny at all. If you've got an EU regulation that has direct effect, that is now on our statute book, even though nobody in our parliament voted for it, and we might well have voted against it in Brussels, yet we need primary legislation to change that now within our own parliament. And that seems like a kind of odd balance to us, so we need to find ways of making that refresh and renewal of our statute books a bit smoother and, you know, a bit less problematic. Looking forward, I think the problem is kind of nobody knows the future. We know there will be opportunities. We know there'll be new sectors. We know there'll be things we will need to do differently. Some of them are kind of clearish. You know, gene editing is one I mentioned. Artificial intelligence is another. But there'll be others. We don't know what they are, but we know we need to have the freedom to work with them, regulate ahead of others, put in place regimes that work for us. And so, you know, Brexit's a prerequisite for that. So to come back to where you started, I think, you know, the suggestion that we didn't know what to do with Brexit and nobody ever says what the opportunities are is partly because nobody knows what the future is. But this is about positioning ourselves right for the future and be able to respond what comes up.
Yeah, so just to steal a point from one of my colleagues' upcoming reports, Tom Clockerty, our head of tax, only one, as far as we can see, only one UK department actually has a list of all the regulations it has made. I think that's right, Tom. Yeah. The others, like if you say, so what are the regulations that you've put in place? They're like, well, don't really know, which doesn't seem like the best.
No, I'm. You're right, is all I can say. That's why we need to do this work. And I think, obviously a lot of the 5 years since Brexit, we haven't used those years to best effect, probably for reasons we all know. But we now have to get on the path. The 3 years wasted in sort of unproductive negotiations, the 2 years of the pandemic nearly, let us hope we're now on a path where we can now focus properly on some of these things.
So, this was something I wanted to talk about. We've obviously there's obviously these disruptions happening, not just in Northern Ireland, but more broadly the effing crisis is known, energy, food and fuel, which is apparently what they call it in number 10. Please don't correct me if I'm wrong because it's too good to check. It's been striking the way that the government is trying to put this into context. It's not just saying, sorry, this will sort itself out. It is the line from Kwasi, from Boris, is that this is part of a transition from a low wage to a high wage economy. This is the change you voted for. This is the change we need. I mean, do you think that is true? Are we seeing a restructuring of the economy before our eyes?
So, I mean, there are obviously a number of things going on here. One is we're seeing that you can't sort of switch the world economy off for a year, switch it back on, and expect it to carry on as normal. And we're seeing a sort of massive adjustment process happening around the world, and that is a big part of what we are seeing here. I think we are also seeing here, the shift to a different model. We shift, a model where there isn't an essentially unlimited supply of relatively cheap labour for sort of relatively less skilled work, and we have to adjust to that. Often less skilled work isn't particularly less skilled, we're finding out, in fact. So I think that adjustment is happening. Is part of the story that we're seeing at the moment. It's not the only thing, and I think it's a good adjustment. What we've got now to do is make sure that the wage increases and these changes are justified by productivity gains, and we've got to run our economy in a way that means people want to invest here and want to make money here, and that the changes that have come through the pandemic and everything else can be facilitated as quickly as possible. Old sectors die, new ones come up. We need to sort of get ahead of that game, make sure those changes happen, so that we become a highly productive society in a way that we've not really succeeded in doing in the last 20 years or so.
But there's a challenge here in terms of government's relationship with business, which obviously the referendum did. There was a sense that the business community had come down on the wrong side, or from the perspective of the Leave vote, and the sort of tension in that relationship. And similarly, recently there's been I've been struck by the rhetoric about business needs to solve these. One source told me from my Sunday Times column, business got drunk on cheap labour. There's definitely but yet in order to be productive and grow and invest, we need business and free enterprise and free markets. I mean, is there a tension there, and which side of that do you fall on?
You need both. I think business. In my experience, business likes stability. It doesn't particularly like the sort of big changes in the external environment, and we've seen that in the last few years. But when they happen, business is incredibly good at adapting to it. And modern free market economies are supremely adaptive organisms, and people do change and adapt really quickly. And we need to do everything we can to make business behave in a way that where owners of business, workers in business can make money and contribute to society's good. And I think that should be what we're about.
You've referred a couple of times to the pandemic, which is obviously we're seeing the architects of. I mean, it wasn't your direct responsibility, but you've been inside the government machine for these kind of quite hellish couple of years. People dropping like flies in the building you were working in. I mean, what did that experience teach you about how government works and how good we are at responding to these kind of things?
Yeah, I think, obviously there will be an inquiry into all of this, so I shouldn't get too far ahead of that, and who knows how long that will be. I think, we learned, and it was pretty grim, particularly March, April last year. We learned, I think, that a lot of the levers that government thought it had didn't work as well as they thought. We learned that the data we thought we had was not as comprehensive or up to date or valuable as we thought, and therefore, decision taking for those directly involved in it was extremely difficult, and that's not surprising in those circumstances. And I think there's some reflections there about how government machinery works more broadly that we can definitely learn from. I think the inquiry, I assume, is going to look at all kinds of things. I do think it's, for me, an important aspect of the inquiry is that it should look at kind of, how the state behaved during the lockdowns, how we used the discretionary powers we were given, some of the policing behaviors, for example, the kind of the link between lockdowns and the course of the pandemic. I think all this really needs to be properly interrogated, and we should try and get behind the conventional wisdom that was around when we were in the depths of this crisis, and really learn. It's really important we learn from this experience and do the right thing if, God forbid, we're ever in this situation again.
So I'm going to throw it open to questions quite shortly, but I wanted to ask a couple of broader closing questions. Almost going back to that history point, to try and tease out what kind of conservative or politician or do you consider of the and again going back to sort of history, like of the political figures of the past, whether recent or past. I mean, who are the kind of ones where you think, yeah, that's my sort of conservatism, that's my sort of philosophy, and the sort of, and like when you look at the Prime Minister, who do you see the parallels with?
Gosh, I sort of feel like if I'd had notice of that question, I could give a better answer than the one I'm probably going to give. I think that I'm not sure there's a kind of a single conservative that I admire. I would say, I'm going to sort of hedge it and say it's a mix of, if you can imagine such a thing, of Lord Salisbury and Margaret Thatcher. Not changing what you don't have to change because continuity is really important in a society, but also being serious when you do have to change things and not sort of shrinking from the task. And I think if you tilt too far one way or the other, then eventually you have difficulties. So that's where I'd kind of put myself in the great stream of conservative evolution.
And Boris, you don't see any echoes behind him as he.
I think every Conservative Prime Minister is the inheritor of his predecessors' sort of views and behaviour, and I think it's too soon to tell.
Just like the French Revolution, but one. So Thatcher and Salisbury, there's something interesting there. Like they both have a sense of Britain as a nation and British greatness, even if Salisbury obviously feels that it is under threat and imperiled, and Thatcher actually is the opposite. She feels that it can be restored. I mean, do you think there's a sense of, obviously your career is focused on Britain overseas, but there is also an idea of like Britain, of a sort of national spirit, and that we all are believing in our own country. Would you say that's something that animates you?
It is, and it's one of the things that it kind of rather worries me that we've lost a bit of this, and I don't think it's true only of Britain. I think it's true for any of the great nation states. of the world, that being part of that nation state should be an important and meaningful thing. And I personally don't like this thing that's got sort of widespread, that your nationality is just some papers you carry. It could be anything. You can change it if you want. It's the nation state community is an important thing, and humanity hasn't found a better way yet of organizing itself other than a democratic nation state where everyone can kind of compete for power, but within a framework that we are all sharing and all equal within. And I think that is really important. I think, look back at history, those are the countries that are successful. And I think we're slightly in danger of losing some of this. I'm often sort of invited to criticize France in this job, and I do so occasionally for sort of obvious reasons. But I do think one of the things the French have got really right is they have put much more emphasis on France as a national community, French history, French culture, French sort of, the way things are done in France. And they want people to buy into that. And, when you look at President Macron's comments on statues and French history and so on, well, I think that's good. I think it's important that people feel part of that historical community, because, that is what makes people strive to achieve things for the future, and that's important.
There's that Fukuyama quote, isn't there, in the end of history, where he says, once liberal democracy has delivered, peace and prosperity and freedom and security for everyone, then they will revolt against liberal democracy itself, because they have nothing left to.
I think we're seeing a bit of that, and I do worry. I think one of the many bad things I think about identity politics is that it represents. To me, it's a sort of reaction against this gradual decline of the nation state, or rather a product of it. People don't identify with the national community, so they're finding the group that they do identify with, and those groups are getting kind of smaller and smaller, and the propositions associated with them are becoming kind of harder and harder for kind of reasonable people to kind of buy into. And you get to the sort of absurd end of the spectrum, some of the propositions that people advance now about identity politics. I'm kind of reminded, I think it was, I may be wrong about this, I think it was Milan Kundera describing under communism, saying, the worst thing about having to mouth the party slogans was that not only were they not true, but in the end it corroded your own self-respect, that you had to keep mouthing these things that everybody knew was not true and you knew were not true, but you didn't have the courage to kind of not do it. And in the end, that sort of wore you down as a human being. And I really worry when we are forced to defend and advance propositions about identity politics that to me seem kind of obviously at variance with reality, and yet we are forced to defend them. And I think that's a bad side, and I don't defend it.
And just I'm interested whether you applied the same framework to thinking about the union, or rather like the reaction against the nation, and the sort of finding new groups to identify with.
I think there's probably something in that, but I also think that the UK has existed for a long time as a political community where people have had different identities, and I do think it's possible to, well, we've shown it, that you can have a political community that is politically organised into a single nation state, and yet people feel kind of historical and other identities, and we've got a particular form of it in the UK where. In Scotland, obviously, particularly, people, has been preserved a legal system, an educational system, so on, that are different but reconcilable with the broader political community. And, historically, that's proved quite a good model, and we should try and preserve it if we can.
This question has only just come to me, and you may feel free to duck it, but inspired by your comments about France, when you were which are your favorite European countries, and which were your favorite to negotiate with, and which are your least favorite to negotiate with?
My goodness.
And if any ambassadors are in the audience.
Yeah, I know this will probably surprise you, but I I really like Belgium. I think Belgium is a great country. I really like the kind of mix of kind of quirkiness and history that you've got in Belgium, you know, a country that's sort of reconciled two national communities. I studied Flemish art, 15th century Flemish history, the great Flemish painters of that period, and I just really like it. It sort of chimes with me, and maybe it's one of the reasons why I find the kind of ahistoricism of the European Union based in the capital of Belgium so kind of particularly kind of irritating. But so there you are.
That's a great answer. We'll go to the Q&A. Apparently, microphones in this conference centre are the only thing harder to get than petrol in London. So my colleagues, if they can come forward, are going to have to ferry this microphone back and forth effectively, or we can swap. So I'm going to lose control of this conversation probably quite rapidly. But if anyone wants to ask a question, please put up your hand, and then Carl, select as you will.
Thank you. Lord Frost, we all wish you the greatest success with the negotiations with the European Union, but even if those negotiations are successful, firstly, there's always the possibility that the devolved assembly might, through the democratic consent mechanism, turn down the deal and ultimately exit the protocol. Are there any contingencies planned for that? And secondly, even if the deal stays in place for a number of years, is there not an asymmetry that goods moving from the UK market to the EU are subject to whatever risk mitigation checks, but goods coming the other way from the EU into the UK and into GB, as far as I'm aware, are not subject to any regulatory or customs checks at all? Thank you.
Hi, it's Joe Mays from Bloomberg. When the UK signed the protocol, it agreed to various trade barriers down the Irish Sea, such as the customs paperwork, the export health certificates, moving goods through border control posts. So isn't it the case that diversion of trade was quite probable at the point of signing the protocol, given those trade barriers? And just secondly, do you think that invoking Article 16 would put the EU in a very tricky position of then having to decide if they were to put a border on the island of Ireland or between Ireland and France? And wouldn't that inflame tensions in Northern Ireland more than the protocol currently is?
Gosh, shall I answer those before they get any more technical and complicated? Lord
Frost predicted that basically every question would be about the technicalities of Article 16, which is why I tried to talk about some other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I reserve the right not to answer the same question twice if it comes up. I think the consent mechanism, it's a very important safeguard for democracy in Northern Ireland, and in circumstances where foreign laws are imposed in Northern Ireland, there needs to be consent to the system, and that will be true in the future as in the past. And if any renegotiated deal preserves any elements of that, then the consent mechanism will need to last, and for the same reasons. So that's where that is, and I think that is really important as a safeguard. The import controls issue, it's not true that there are no controls for goods coming into the UK. There are customs controls. At the moment, the SPS controls are delayed, but there are customs controls. They will be completed in December. We have not put those off. I think the broader point is, we should design our border according to what works for us. We don't have to do what the EU does at its border just because the EU does it. Sometimes reciprocity is good, it gets you what you want, and sometimes it's sort of self-defeating because you're just putting a burden on yourself for no good reason. And in designing our border, we want a world-class border, and sometimes it'll be like what the EU does, and sometimes it won't, and that's where we should aim for. I think, Joe, on your questions, You're right in one sense that you could anticipate that some of the mechanisms in the protocol might produce diversion of trade, but at the same time there's a safeguard in the protocol that is designed to be used if there is diversion of trade. So, is that a circular provision or what? I maintain that the safeguard is there for a reason, and if we're seeing significant diversion of trade, and we definitely are on the island of Ireland, those safeguards are there to be used, and that's what we'll do if it's necessary. Final point: I don't think, and nobody wants a hard border on the island of Ireland. That's excluded. That means no infrastructure, no checks at that border. I don't think it helps. To think about border checks between Ireland and France either. I think we can find solutions without that. That's never been something we particularly wanted to see. How the EU runs its single market is its business. I think we can find a solution that avoids all of those things and is good for everyone.
One of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement, Lord Trimble, recently co-authored a report which stated that mutual recognition, mutual enforcement could be a solution to the issues which are being faced in Northern Ireland. I'm just interested to sort of hear your views. Do you think that's a solution if Article 16 is triggered?
If anyone has questions which aren't about Article 16, please put your hand up really high.
So let me answer that one. Meanwhile, mutual enforcement. It's a very workable solution, definitely, and the fact that one of the proponents of it is a former Commission DG shows that. I think the problem is that it requires a degree of extremely close cooperation and trust between us and Ireland in particular, but also the rest of the EU to make it work. And we don't know that those circumstances are going to prevail. It doesn't feel like it at the moment. So we have to design a system that is capable of working in other circumstances, and that's what we've done in our command paper. We've borrowed bits from mutual enforcement where it seems useful, but that's the reason there are differences. We wanted to put on the table something we knew was workable. And nobody has told me it's not workable, so we keep trying.
I mean, one question that actually springs up from that, which you refer to the need to get on with the Irish and to cooperate. I mean, obviously, like we do need to cooperate with our European friends and allies and partners and neighbours, whichever ones those you want. I mean, has the AUKUS deal, has that, and a sort of rather visceral French reaction to it, how do you think we repair relations on that front, or is some of this just theatricality for basically, and is some of this theatricality given that their domestic election landscape, or are they like genuinely aggrieved, and what are they going to try and do to us in response?
So I think on AUKUS is kind of all those things. We're seeing a visceral reaction. We're seeing a sort of strategic reaction to it. I think these things sort of pass, and a kind of high quality relationship between us and France and the rest of the EU has got to be capable of absorbing the significant strategic changes and adjustments within it, and that is where we would ideally wish to get to. I think with France we have had ups and downs of relationships throughout our history, and nevertheless we cooperate and work together, and we will do in the future. So I'm kind of philosophical about this. The important thing that we need to do is do the right thing for this country, and you deal with the reactions to that as they come in, as it were.
Hi, Stephen Pfeiffer. I'm County Councillor from Gloucestershire. Considering your interest in history, when you first got brought in for the negotiations, were there any particular negotiations throughout history that you either saw analogies with or drew inspiration from as you came in, and sort of the mentality that you wanted to bring to the team that you were running?
Or business strategies?
Yeah.
So No, not really as a kind of one-on-one parallel, I suppose. We tried to draw, behaviours from all kinds of situations, and we definitely looked at what you can learn from asymmetric negotiations, because obviously we're a smaller economy than the EU, self-evidently, and the power relationship was different, but there are ways of kind of compensating for that through various ways, which I don't sort of want to give away all the trade secrets, but keeping the other side on the hop is an important part of that. Uncertainty about how people are going to react, how we're going to react, but also, I kind of believe in repetition. And by kind of constantly advancing your own propositions about things, you make them seem more real. Something that seems weird when you first mention it, when you've talked about it 100 times, that people have got kind of used to the idea, and maybe it's possible to accommodate it. So those are some of the things we brought to it, and I think we always will be in that sort of relatively asymmetric position when we're doing these negotiations, and we must adjust our behaviours accordingly.
John Strafford Beaconsfield. The Conservative Party is the party of the whole of the United Kingdom. And when the Northern Ireland Conservatives started, the then Conservative government was very hesitant to give support to the party in Northern Ireland because of pressure from the Republic of Ireland at the time. It's now been stated that we will fight the seats in Northern Ireland, or at least a couple of the seats in Northern Ireland. Does this have any impact on your negotiations? And how do you feel, do you get any pressure from the Republic of Ireland on this? How do you think it might play out if the Conservative Party actually puts candidates into places like North Down and fights those seats very vigorously?
So I don't think it affects our negotiations particularly, this fact. I think there's more things, there are bigger issues at play in this question of where Conservatives fight seats. The Republic of Ireland has at least one party, and possibly more, that operates outside the Republic of Ireland in the north. So I think it's entirely reasonable that the Conservative Party should operate within our own country in Northern Ireland, and I don't think anyone would sort of seriously contest that proposition. I think it's a good thing. I went to the NI Conservatives reception last night, as the Prime Minister did, and we strongly support all the efforts there. It's good.
Hi, Lord Frost. Harry York from The Telegraph. Just to go back onto France, today Clement Byrne has again threatened to cut off energy supplies to Jersey over fishing licences. Do you think that's a proportionate response, and do you think the French are, overplaying their hand on this matter in the same way with AUKUS? And apologies if you've discussed this previously, but before the G7, you were summoned by the US top official in London over our approach to the protocol. Are you frustrated at how Washington has handled the Northern Ireland question?
So on fisheries, I do think it's important to keep these things in proportion. We have granted 98% of the licenses applications from EU boats to fish in our waters according to the different criteria in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So, we do not accept that we are not abiding by that agreement. We have been extremely generous, and the French focusing in on a small category of boats and claiming that we've behaved unreasonably, I think, is not really a kind of fair reflection of the efforts we have made. We would have liked a different sort of fisheries deal out of the TCA, and we get control of our waters eventually, but we agreed this deal, and we are implementing it in good faith. So I think it's sort of unreasonable to suggest we're not. If there is a reaction from France, they'll have to persuade others in the EU, obviously, to go along with it, and it does need to be proportionate. I think I would just say, we for all the frustrations of the last 18 months, and particularly since January, I don't think we as a country have resorted to those sort of threats. I know people get kind of frustrated with the way we behave sometimes, but we have not made those sort of direct threats to our neighbours. And the vaccine export ban earlier this year is another area where the EU resorts to legalism, it resorts to threats quite quickly, and I just think that's not how we should behave, and we don't, and I don't see why our neighbours feel they have to. I think on the Americans and Northern Ireland, all I would say is we, the Prime Minister, President Biden, are united on the importance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and they've said that in public, and that's what we're trying to protect. So we have no difficulties with those propositions, and that's how we're taking it forward.
Ben Laurie from the Belfast newsletter, from France back to Northern Ireland again. Yesterday, at the Joint Unionist event, Jim Allister QC, who's one of the, they're all taking a case, obviously, which they're appealing because they lost, talked about the absurdity of the UK government simultaneously talking tough in the command paper and in this court, which I believe the appeal is next week, arguing that against the idea that the Act of Union, the foundational document of the United Kingdom, has been damaged. And I just wondered what you thought about that criticism of the paradox of the UK position.
It is, it's an interesting point. I probably shouldn't comment on a case while it's actually going through, particularly with the appeal so imminent. I think all I would say is have a look, watch how the arguments play out in court next week, and then let's have a further discussion.
Cheers. Hi, Lord Frost. It's Christian from Bloomberg. I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on another part of the UK, specifically where do you think Brexit will lead the movement for Scottish independence? And I'm just interested to hear where you see this argument going in the future. Cheers.
So it's not my patch, obviously, directly. I think that Brexit makes Scottish independence, my personal view is, it makes it a more challenging proposition for sort of obvious reasons to do with trade patterns, exports, borders, customs, and so on. That's a very sort of practical, kind of unemotional argument. And to come back to where we started, what I was saying earlier, I think Brexit offers the opportunity to get back to where we have been not that long ago, which is of a UK nation state that accommodates different identities and has a sort of civic patriotism around what we're trying to achieve as a country. And I hope we can get that back, and I think it will prove to be extremely appealing and successful if we can.
Sorry, and a massive plug here. Hopefully there should still be some copies at the back of Strength in Union, an essay collection written by edited by Andrew Bowie MP, Bowie MP, and written by William Hague, Theresa May, the Secretaries of State for Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, just a galaxy of conservative thinkers on why the union matters to them, not just the union of Scotland and England, but the union of all four parts of the UK. So get your copy now. It's a really good read and a really good book. Thank you.
Edward Webster from St Albans. Who's going to win the French election?
So I never make predictions, especially about the future.
Who do you hope wins the French election?
I'm sure that the French people will make the best possible choice from the candidates offered to them.
Hi, Lord Frost. I'm from Belfast, so I'm not going to ask you a question about the protocol as such. Are you prepared and happy in your personal life to become the poster boy for Northern Irish unionism?
I don't really feel comfortable being the poster boy for anything, really, is the honest answer. I think, I never sort of expected to be a politician, and I'm not really, and I still find it slightly uncomfortable to be thrust into these positions. I think so. Not really, I think, is the answer. I think what we are doing is trying to do the best thing for kind of everyone in Northern Ireland, unionists or not. And there is, of course, the polling suggests that the number of people who believe in the value of Northern Ireland being part of the United Kingdom is quite a lot larger than those who are kind of political unionists. And I think we need to sustain and support that, because it's really important to the whole of the UK.
We just have time for 2 more questions, if anyone wants to ask anything.
Hi, Lord Frost. After you've finished all these difficult negotiations and you've ensured that the UK remains what it is, a sovereign nation, and you've talked about the worry about the future of a nation state that is a democracy, what future would you like Britain to play as an ambassadorial role for these values? What position would you like it to take?
I think it probably deserves a fuller answer. I think it was Pitt, wasn't it, who said Britain saved Europe by its example, and I think that puts it a bit too strongly in current circumstances, obviously, but I think the power of example is really important. And what we have got to do as a country is be successful. That we've got to do the things that are in our control, and when we do them well and effectively and grow fast and do things that people like seeing, then we will be automatically an ambassador for this country. And I think we've actually had the tradition in this country is actually one of sort of rather understated patriotism and a bit of self-deprecation almost within it. And people look at this country, and historically they've generally liked what they've seen. And we should try and achieve that. We should do the things that make us successful and focus on ourselves, and others will follow.
David, we had a nice chat last night. It was good to see you again. My name's Tom Riley. I work for Covington Law Firm. My question is, do you think that the UK and the civil service are ready for the change that we need to make in order to make a success of Brexit? Slightly leading question, but...
I'm confident the country is. I think the people in this country voted for change, want change, and change is here. And it's going to be a good thing for everybody. The civil service, isn't traditionally thought of as being the greatest exemplar of the sort of value of change and reinvention, but I think it's going to have to be to deliver what we need to in this new environment. It's going to have to get smarter. It may have to get a bit smaller. It's going to have to get a bit focused on delivery, and government needs to focus on what it can do well, and that it's the core functions of government. And I just wish much of the civil service would sort of focus on the day job and not worry too much about kind of fripperies and peripheral bits of their activity. Do the day job right, and we will succeed.
Well, with that, we have to draw our session to the close. Thank you so much to Lord Frost for a fascinating event. I should just say, please join us again in half an hour for our final event with Jacob Rees-Mogg. B, we have a smorgasbord of reports and swag and other things at the back of the room. So please, on your way out, everything must go. Just take them all with you. Grab the fixtures and fittings. And sign up to our newsletter. But please, above all, thank David Frost.